and all that stuff.
Yep, absolutely. I'll just start. Please interrupt at any point if you have a question or if the sound sounds dodgy. So yeah, I'm James Ball. I'm studying a PhD at the Forest Ecology and Conservation Group at Cambridge, supervised by David Coombs. And I'm looking now at tropical forest phenology, so the kind of seasonal patterns of the forests and how they change through time, and how we can use different innovative technologies such as sort of UAV-based sensors to study the forest in new detail. As Mark mentioned, I did the MSc at CEP, and that's really where my love of tropical forests and the application of technology to understand and protect them really took off. And Mark supervised my research project on crude oil extraction in the Ecuadorian Amazon. So it's a shame I can't be back there in person, but it's great to be back virtually. And well, my background is a bit unusual. So I was a physicist initially and did up to a master's in physics, and then decided I wanted really to focus on environmental problems a lot more, and from that kind of transitioned more into ecology. What we'll be looking at today is a project I did, which started sort of when I was at Melbourne, and then back at Imperial as a PhD student, as a visiting student there. And it's using deep convolutional neural networks to forecast the location of future deforestation. And so we hear a lot about kind of AI and machine learning, and this is what I've tried to do. So apply kind of AI and machine learning in a way that can help us to protect forests. And this work was done in collaboration with Cool Earth, who are a international climate change and tropical forest conservation NGO with projects in Peru and Papua New Guinea, amongst other places. And this research was intended to help them work more proactively with their kind of local partner communities in the forest. So it's part funded by them and also by a grant from the European Union Regional Development Fund. And it was also done working alongside Dr. Seth Flaxman over at the maths department there, and Katerina Petrova, one of his master's students. And so just to outline, I'll go through the kind of the background and motivations for this work, and the challenges that we faced going into it. We'll have a little technical introduction, looking at kind of deep learning and computer vision, the kind of the methods that we used, what kind of model architectures and modeling approach we took, and then we'll look at kind of what came from that work. So to start, we've got a short video. So we know tropical forests are a vast store and potential sinker of carbon, so their continued existence is a vital part of our efforts to mitigate climate change. They're also some of the richest and most diverse habitats on the planet. But as countries and communities develop, they're facing intense and widespread destruction. So about 20% of the Amazon biome has already been lost. While the scale and intensity of the destruction is overwhelming, the spread of the deforestation, as we can see, is non-random. We can see in this footage that there are emergent spatiotemporal patterns and trends. So we wanted to ask, is it possible to characterize these patterns? And in recent years, AI and big data have revolutionized how we make predictions across many fields. And so if we can better understand and predict how deforestation spreads, we hope we can take more informed decisions to protect valuable forest. So there have been previous efforts to forecast deforestation, notably Professor Rob Ewers there at Imperial and his group several years ago. But previous approaches have had limited success. And why has that success been limited? So if we consider the key predictors of deforestation, so these are kind of proximity to access routes, such as roads and rivers, proximity to settlements and agriculture. These kinds of things can give us clues as to where deforestation is likely to occur in the future. However, firstly, roads and settlements in remote forest regions are often unofficial and unmapped. And secondly, these landscapes can be highly dynamic, with new roads and settlements popping up while others fade from existence. Additionally, local data on sort of population density and economic variables is very imprecise. So previous efforts to forecast deforestation have been based on static and often out-of-date input maps. Obviously, basing predictions on unreliable data is problematic. So what we're looking for is a data-driven approach that can automatically recognize the dynamic features of a landscape, such as settlements and roads, and avoid the need for relying on dodgy data. And so in recent years, there's been huge advances in the field of computer vision, including the emergence of convolutional neural networks. So computer vision is basically the tools and techniques we use to teach a computer to see things, recognize things. It's difficult to explain in a single slide, but I'll try and give you a flavor of what it's about. And so what's novel about convolutional neural networks, as we can see from this video, is that they maintain and work with the spatial structure of the data. So they're very good at working with image type data, including satellite imagery. And by scanning across an image, it can apply many different filters, but allow it to identify very simple features of that image, such as gradients and edges. And then by identifying the very simple features and combining these through the network, gradually the features can be combined into increasing complexity. And this continues through the network until machines essentially can identify highly complex objects. In this example, it's a bird. So with a network and enough training, somewhat inspired by the neurons in the visual cortex of our brain. So as I said, it's revolutionized the field of computer vision, so how computers can see and recognize things. And so the opportunities we saw was that it could allow us to automatically extract features from satellite images. So with the animal, it may be able to recognize an ear or a beak, but here we're interested in features that could drive deforestation, such as roads or settlements. As I said, in often poorly mapped but dynamic areas. So we've got an increasing amount of data coming back from space, from satellites, that we can gain insights from. And we know that these types of networks can handle large amounts of data and provide us with interesting insights. And as we can see from the field of computer vision, it's a very powerful predictive tool. It's also been used in the context of using satellite imagery to predict levels of poverty remotely and forecast weather anomalies. And so the questions we asked ourselves were, is it possible to predict the probability of deforestation at a location with deep learning approaches? And if it is, to what accuracy and resolution would this be possible? And so this was our study area. So we have in the center, the Junin department of Peru, and we included some other surrounding areas to provide a richer data set. And in the very center, we can see the Cool Earth communities. So these are the territories of partner communities that Cool Earth work with. So it's a large area, so it's 75,000 kilometers squared, and that comes out to about 100 million pixels. A lot of encroachment in this region from a range of different drivers, including industrial and small-scale agriculture, mining, both legal and illegal mining, increasing development of local communities, and well, it's difficult for the Peruvian government to keep track of it all. And they've been struggling to contain the associated deforestation. They've increasingly been relying on military intervention supported by satellite detection of deforestation events. So what we hoped was that the system here could allow them to be able to stay one step ahead and in some senses, help to contain the spread of deforestation. And so what we found for networks, so what we allowed the kind of machine to predict with, were a combination of time series bands, so time series layers, and static layers. So the satellite imagery we used was from the Landsat satellite, and it has 4 bands. We had a nice clean data set from 2014 to 2018 of cloud-free 30-meter resolution imagery. We also used a digital surface model. So this was from JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency. It's again at 30-meter resolution, and what we hoped was that the network could essentially learn from another spatial dimension. So read how the deforestation was progressing through the landscape, kind of rough terrain areas or high incline areas might be more difficult to deforest. And so we thought this could provide another interesting layer for the network to learn from. Then the labels,
James, can I interrupt for just a moment? Your voice
Please.
quality is a little variable at my end. I'm not sure how others are going, but it's phasing. It's understandable, but only just. I'm not sure if there's anything you can do to improve the bandwidth at your end.
Let me see.
Are any others having trouble with this? Perhaps you could say in the chat pane.
I'll see. I'll close a few things down.
Yeah, so yes, the others are having the same trouble.
So yeah, I had to do this through the browser rather than through the Teams app, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah.
I closed a couple of things down, but I can try and maybe just speak a bit more clearly and directly.
Yes.
I'm not sure.
Yes. Maybe just yes. So we've got 5 or 6 people saying yes, they're having trouble hearing you. So maybe just speak a little more slowly and deliberately slowly, and we'll just hope for the best. I don't think we can do much else.
Okay. Well, if there's any questions that have come up from not understanding what's going on, do just interject, and I'll try and address any bits where it phased out.
Okay, people will probably type in their questions in the chat panel, and I'll let you know if there's something that is relatively urgent.
Okay. And so I was just talking about the data that we use to train the networks. And so we've got a combination of satellite imagery, terrain data, so yeah, how the terrain changes through space. And then we have a record of annual deforestation from 2000 to 2018, again at 30-meter resolution. So this is known as a sort of a Hansen data set, or a global forest change data set. And this provided both the labels to train the model with, so the kind of the truth labels, and also as an input layer, so using historic loss as a predictor. So again, it's a lot of pixels. So there's 100 million pixels roughly, and that's over 400,000 deforestation events per year to teach the network with. And yeah, again, we're hoping that it can automatically extract the features of satellite imagery that can allow us to predict deforestation at a given location. So each data point we're looking at, we basically have a frame around that data point, and we've got a central target pixel. And so what you present to the network is a central target pixel with the context of what's going on around it, both in terms of the satellite imagery, the terrain, and the historic deforestation. And then what you're asking the network to do is to predict whether that central pixel, based on all that information that it has, will become deforested next year or will remain forested. So here it's just 5 by 5 pixels, but in reality, the frames that we were showing them were much bigger, so about 50 pixels by 50 pixels, with each pixel being roughly 30 meter in dimension. So we're hoping if we show it enough deforestation events and pixels that remain forested, it can learn, it can strengthen the connections in the network, and eventually be able to tell us whether, if we show it a new pixel, whether it will remain forested next year or become deforested. So essentially a binary classification problem. And so these networks can be very complex, and there's lots of different varieties and flavors that we can use. And we tested a number of different architectures, some of which dealt with the temporal domain of the data in a more sophisticated way than others. And here I'll just present one very quickly, just to give an idea. And so you can feed data into the network in different ways. You can manipulate the types of connections and the way the network's connected to suit your requirements. And so we looked at something called a 3D convolutional neural network. So a normal convolutional neural network, like the ones I was showing you before, just scan across an image in 2 dimensions. But what we can do with a 3D convolutional neural network is stack up the data through time and allow it to scan over not just the spatial aspect of the data, but also the temporal aspect, and so characterize the spatio-temporal features of that data. And so we have the 2 spatial dimensions that it can scan over, and we also have the bands that are stacked up, and then it can scan through time as well. And so it can understand what's going on, not just in the spatial neighborhood of our data point, but in the spatial and temporal neighborhood of our data point. And so we feed the data in this kind of stacked way through time, and it connects to the rest of the network. And then some machine learning techniques, such as gradient descent, which is a type of optimization, or similar to optimization, allows us to iteratively nudge the network into a more sensitive, more accurate state. And so, by training like this, it becomes more and more accurate and classified.
What day of the week is the 24th, Alex?
Oh, James, we may have lost you.
So
can you hear us?
That's when you're going to start your exhibition.
Can anyone else hear James, or is it just me?
No, it went quiet on my end also.
Okay.
I can't hear him either.
Oop. James, we've lost you. I don't know if you can hear us, but yes.
Ooh, am I back?
You are back.
Okay, good. Yeah, it was flashing at me, but yeah. Am I coming through okay now?
Yes, you are. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Thank you for your patience. And so what the overall aim was to take this data from 2014, 2018 and make a prediction for 2019. So admittedly, this is slightly out of date now. We've just got the newly available data, so we're working on making those 2020 predictions and also tweaking the model so that it can predict 2 or more years ahead. And because of the kind of complexity of the network that we have, there are lots of different parameters that we need to tune. I'll skip over those. But we basically set up lots of models with lots of these different parameters, and these parameters describe how the networks learn. So at what rate they learn, how they process the data, these kinds of things. And so to start with, the first step was to train on the 2014 to 2016 data and ask the network to predict those 2017 labels that we had. And so it could understand how well it was doing using this data to predict those 2017 labels and learn from that. I should note that there's far more forested pixels that remain forested in the landscape and become deforested. Only about 0.5% of the pixels in the landscape will become deforested year on year. So we had to tweak the input data so that it was balanced, so that we were showing the network a similar amount of pixels that would become deforested and remain forested, so that it didn't just end up predicting everything would remain forested, because in theory that would still be 99.5% accurate, given the overall data, only 0.5% becomes deforested. So we sample from the available training data so that it's balanced and return the same balance. So data that has pixels that become deforested or remain forested, and we keep that balanced data for validation and testing sets. We perform k-fold cross-validation, and we allow the network to learn, and we only show it 80% of data at this stage. And so, yeah. And then we have withheld some of the data to test it, to see how well it's doing. So 20% of data we've withheld, and we ask the network to make predictions on that data and see how well it's making those predictions. And from that, we can make an initial model selection. So we know which kinds of models are working the best. And then we go through and do a similar thing for 2015 to 2017, predicting on those 2018 labels. So this is a year ahead. So we're asking it to now predict something that it hasn't been trained on. So it's only been trained on 2014 to 2016 to predict 2017. We're now asking it to predict 2018. And so as we're trying to make forecasts, it's important to understand how well the model can predict one step ahead. And then from that, we pick the best performing models. So ones which could predict 2018 the best without having seen the data up to that point. And then we retrain the models on the full data set available. And so the more data it has to learn from, the more reliable, the better predictions it can make. And then from the kind of the best models that we selected and then retrained on the full data set, we used that to input 2015 to 2018 data to make predictions for 2019, so a year for which data wasn't yet available. And again, we're working with the new data now to make predictions for 2020. And so we'll have a quick look at the forecast now, but just to recap, we've got this central target pixel in a frame, and we're trying to predict whether it will remain forested or become deforested next year. And so this frame is actually much larger, as I said, and so you essentially show the computer this image with multiple bands, and it will tell you whether that central pixel will remain forested or become deforested a year ahead. And so we ran this on all the forested
James, I think we've lost you again, if you can hear us.
Oh. It was a bit brief at that time, but very frustrating.
You're back.
Yeah. Please bear with me, yeah. So I was just saying that the forecasts we produced essentially assigned probability of deforestation to each pixel across the entire landscape. So this is zoomed in to one of those Cool Earth partnerships that I mentioned, so one of the indigenous territories. And we can see that the predicted deforestation will merge the historic lost patches. And so it tends to act in certain directions. I'll look at two local examples which I thought were particularly interesting. Okay, so the first of which was next to Oburi, which was one of these Ashaninka sites. And so what we can see here is a new access route that was built in 2018, and we checked that with high resolution satellite imagery, and we've confirmed that, and we can see that the model expects deforestation to radiate along its route in patches, which is intuitive. We know how deforestation spreads based on access routes. However, we detected a huge forest loss area also in 2018, which we then identified to be a landslide. And what was interesting was that there wasn't such an intense prediction of deforestation around here. A model that predicts deforestation just on the proximity of recent forest loss would predict a huge continued radiation from this source. But we just see a small amount of anticipated loss around the peripheries here, which you know, again, is what we'd hope for, given that it's a very remote landslide and there's unlikely to be any human populations in that area. And so we found that the models that predicted the best were the ones which did implicitly handle the temporal dimension of the data, so the 3D CNN that I showed you. And when testing the model on data that it hasn't been trained on, it presented a 94% accuracy. And so, yeah, of those pixels that it predicted to become deforested, 86% of those did become deforested. And yeah. So from here, we want to understand what's going on a little bit better. So it seems like it's making what we might term as intelligent decisions based on the context of what it sees. We don't really understand how it's making those decisions. And this is a general problem with deep neural networks. They predict very well, but they're difficult to really probe and understand. But there are new techniques that allow us to investigate. We also want to look at those cases where the pixel is classified with about 50% chance that it will become deforested. What features of those pixels makes it difficult to classify? We'd also like to extend the time series, allow the network to learn from more data into the past, and potentially include additional predictor layers. So whether layers that have protected areas coded into them allow the network to predict more accurately. We'd also like to extend the forecasting horizon. So at the moment, it's just 1 year ahead, which we think is useful in some respects, especially given the desire for kind of deforestation alerts. We saw the Peruvian government trying to control the deforestation there, but it would be interesting to see how much the accuracy drops by if we were to extend that forecasting horizon. And so in summary, we can use these deep learning methods to predict the locations of future deforestation at 30-meter resolution with what I'd argue is an impressive accuracy. Networks seem to be able to discern different contexts, so that might imply some artificial intelligence. We hope that governments and NGOs can use these tools to and the forecast to prioritize the interventions and be more effective with their limited resources that they can designate to conservation. It was a purely data-driven approach, so we don't pretend that it's mechanistic or it tries to learn the underlying processes. It learns from purely what it sees. And because the data sets that we use are freely available, it has global potential to be scaled up and make forecasts for any tropical forest region in the world. I should just add on that data-driven approach, and it not being mechanistic, it does mean that it can't account for regime shifts. So, for example, the election of Bolsonaro in Brazil rapidly increased the amount of deforestation. And so our network that learns from what's happened previously would not be able to account for something like that. And so before questions, I just wanted to thank Dr. Seth Flaxman over at the mathematics department, who was great for the more technically demanding sides of the project. I couldn't have done it without him. And also the very talented Katrina, who's now paid the big bucks as a quant at Goldman Sachs. Unfortunately, she hasn't remained in academia. But also Mark for introducing me to Seth initially, and Minerva. I'm not sure. I think she did join in the end for the sort of early inspiration in the project. So thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much. Very much, James. Imagine a round of applause. Well done. That seems to be the hardest bit to get across the remote. So there was a question, a couple of questions in the chat pane. You're wrong. wrote, just wondering how accurate will be the long-term forecasts when using only a 20-year data set. Now, you've thought about that clearly, but what are your thoughts? Can you expand on that a bit?
Sure. I think the systems with which we're dealing are highly complex. And so the previous approaches that have used, the kind of the road maps and these kinds of things have often tried to predict a long time into the future.
It's super easy.
The accuracy is just, but they're not very accurate. And so it's kind of speculative, and you can look at the underlying drivers potentially and characterize the underlying drivers. But if you want real kind of spatial precision with where you're predicting deforestation, it will be very difficult to do, many years into the future. You've got the human systems interacting with the ecological systems, so the social, the economic, and so making accurate forecasts is very difficult.
Very challenging. Yeah. Onesimus says, I'm wondering how the outputs of the model are validated. Is this based on actual data collected on the ground?
So the deforestation data set we used, the global forest change data set, was validated with ground-based observations, and so it itself only has a limited accuracy in terms of classifying correctly deforestation or not deforestation. And so I anticipate that the behaviors of that classification model will have in some senses been incorporated into our model, and I think that's something that is definitely worth exploring further. How much of the accuracy we see is an artifact of the data on which it's trained.
Yeah, great. Maybe people should ask their own questions rather than have me read them. Rebecca, you've got the next one. Rebecca Clue.
I'm trying to find Rebecca.
Well, I can read it out. Are you aware of Ecometrica? https ecometrica.com. It might be an interesting collaboration opportunity. Maybe just something to look up later if you're not aware of it.
No, I think the name rings a bell, but I haven't looked into it in much detail, so I'll check that out.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rebecca.
And Ian, do you want to ask a question, Ian, if you're online?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the presentation. That was really interesting stuff. And I'm pretty sure I remember you from a couple of years ago when you were on the master's course. I'm trying desperately to remember if you were in my tutorial group. But
I wasn't, but I did pop in and you showed us some of your models. So.
Okay,
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, my memory is not completely failing me then. I was just wondering, do you think your technique would yield a different answer than the traditional methods to the total national rate or global rate of deforestation? And if so, what direction might your estimate be? Would it be higher or lower?
Thanks, Ian. That's a really good question. So I'd start by saying that the model isn't designed to make these kind of bulk predictions, as it's flying at the pixel level. So yeah, I think the utility of the model that we designed is that kind of very local level identification of risk areas. The methods could different forms. So you've got the spatial predictions, which you can then sum over, but I don't know whether they're more useful than just a pure kind of time series approach that takes into account economic variables, such as GDP per capita. You're trying to predict the bulk interested in the spatial locations, and also this is so stochastic anyway. The rates of deforestation in different countries in different areas. As is potentially GDP per capita or commodity prices, other things that might drive it. And so these kind of bulk estimates, it's difficult. In terms of the direction, if we were to kind of sum over all the pixels in our landscapes, I'd say we would potentially underpredict, but it depends on the trend essentially. So if the deforestation trend is upwards in an area, that's not necessarily something our model would pick up on. Our model picks up on what's happened previously, and so yeah, if for example with populist leaders such as Bolsonaro or other countries who want to really increase their expansion into the rainforest, it could be that our model underpredicts overall. But if RED Plus or other programs to prevent deforestation are very effective, then our model would be over-predicting. But like I say, it's not, our model isn't capable of dealing with those kind of shifts in the system. Did that come through okay?
Yes, we lost you there just at the end, but I think we got the bulk of your response. I mean, it was good. We should move on to the next question. Payson asks, Payson, are you there? Can you ask your question?
Yes, hi. Thank you for your presentation. I'm just wondering if you think this deep learning approach can be adapted to predict a more detailed land use change, such as the change from forest to cropland or forest to settlements. Thank you.
Thanks, Payson. I think it would be capable. So these deep learning approaches are already used for land use classification, such as different agricultural types, whether it's settlement or whatever else, and they perform better than the more traditional machine learning approaches, such as sort of random forest classifiers. So already we've seen an improvement there, and so it wouldn't be unthinkable to kind of extend that into a classification, a forecasting classification, essentially like we presented here, which could predict multiple land use types. I think the barrier would be the input data. So we used the global forest change data set, which is great because it's available everywhere, easy to access, easy to kind of download and process. But yeah, if you're designing a different problem, maybe with multiple kind of land uses, you'd need to think about how you match the land use, kind of the truth or label data that you're using with the satellite data. And yeah, the complexity comes then in kind of preparing the data and inputting that.
Thanks, James. Diego has a question about model accuracy. Diego, are you online? I can't hear him. So I don't know if you can see it there, James. Can you?
What was the name? Sorry. DH13.
How accurate would be the model if you used only testing data or reduced the training data set to 50% of the information, given that there was only a few years worth of information? I guess the more general question is, have you done a sensitivity analysis on the testing to training data set ratio or anything like that?
We haven't. So we want essentially as much data available as possible to train your networks on. And these deep neural networks thrive when you can just input a flood of data to them. We felt that the kind of the 20% testing for each year that we were doing was a good amount, a good kind of to keep in reserve to see how well the model was performing. I don't know how useful it would be necessarily to drop the amount of training data down, but I think you can see how the model accuracy improves as you feed it more data. So we run through what's called epochs. So an epoch with respect to machine learning is one full use of your available training data. And with deep learning methods, you'll use 10, 20, or even more of these epochs. So you'll allow it to learn from the training data, but over and over again. And you can see how the model accuracy increases. And what we've seen, if we kind of parameterize it and tune it correctly, is that we don't seem to be reaching that kind of plateau of accuracy that you'd see. We haven't managed to run enough epochs to see that accuracy plateau. So it would be interesting to see, given enough time and computing resources, just how accurate the models could become. But then you've got the kind of the other side of that coin is it's very energy intensive to be training deep neural networks, and yeah, quite carbon intensive. So we wouldn't want to go too mad. I think then the cost benefit would start to swing the wrong way.
Yeah, okay. So look, there are no more questions in the chat pane, but I do, if you will tolerate it, I have one of my own. The forested, not forested binary judgment, of course, could be extended to forest degradation and on a continuous scale, in which case you'd have better power in your your model fitting. Do you think that there is some prospect of doing that, or is that going to be technically too difficult?
I think it would be a really wonderful thing to do. I think, yeah, kind of deforestation is only kind of one small piece of the puzzle, and yeah, we're seeing forests change in many different ways and being yeah, transformed in different ways. And the way we set it up is quite limited. We assume that if a pixel becomes deforested, then it's gone forever, and we aren't able to predict the spread of new forest or, you know, regenerating forest, and that would be an interesting thing to do. And similarly, degradation. It's just the kind of input data is not really there yet. If we had a kind of global data set, which with a reasonable degree of
I think.
I'm back.
Oh, you're back.
I was just saying that the limiting thing with many of these problems, especially kind of deep learning approaches, is that kind of quality of the input data and the volume of it that you would like to have. Did that come through okay?
So, yes, all but the last 10 words. So we got the picture. The data simply aren't available, and I suspected that would be the case. Look, I think our time's just about up. I guess the only thing I'm sure that it's in other people's minds as well. You mentioned about the possibility of understanding what's going inside the black box, and the thing that will occur to most people is, can these models adequately deal with particularly those slightly longer timeframes, things like climate change and fire frequencies and that sort of thing. Do you anticipate, because they're built on correlation structures, do you anticipate that they might fail when different kinds of events start to push around the landscape?
Yeah, I don't think these models are well suited to making those predictions. You know, as we enter a new world, should we say, then the utility of them does fall. The hope is, though, that because deforestation is such an urgent issue and one which relates so closely to the problems that we see with climate change, it's that kind of urgent action and intervention, conservation intervention that we want to be facilitating. The aim of our model isn't to kind of predict and account for, you know, future changing climates, which we know are inevitably coming. But I think, yeah, it's other modelers, I guess, and other very talented meteorologists and those kinds of things who are assigned to those problems.
Okay, look, thank you very much. I think we've exhausted our questions, and hopefully we've exhausted you. Thanks. Thank you, James. That was wonderful. I can see what you're doing and more importantly, why you're doing it. So good luck with the rest of it. I hope it goes really well.
Thank you, Mark. It's been nice to be back. And yeah, shame about the connection, but yeah, very pleasurable to present.
No, you managed well. Thanks everybody for turning up and for your comments and questions. Bye now.
If you have any other questions, do feel free to get in touch.
I know Minerva will want to follow up with you for sure.
Okay, good stuff. I look forward to speaking to her.
Okay, bye now.
All right, cheers, Mark. Bye.